My name's Philip, I'm 35 years old, and from the outside, my life might seem perfect. I'm a manager at a mid-sized tech company. Nothing extraordinary, but respectable. My days are consumed by work. Meetings, emails, deadlines, it's an endless loop, a race I never seem to win. Even weekends offer no relief. If I'm not answering calls, I'm scrambling to fix some new crisis. I've tried to break free from the grind. A few gym memberships, untouched books on my shelves, even a guitar I thought I'd learn to play. But none of it lasted. By the time I'm done with work, I'm too drained to focus on anything else. Life feels like a never-ending cycle of exhaustion and unmet expectations. But I've found one way to escape: clubbing. Once or twice a month, I hit a random club in the city. The music, the lights, the energy, it pulls me out of my monotonous life. For a few hours, I get to let loose, drink a little too much, and embrace the thrill of being someone else. It's not perfect, but it's the closest thing to freedom I have. This was supposed to be just another night out. I wasn't expecting much. The club I chose wasn't my usual spot, and the vibe was off. The crowd felt lifeless, the music was just loud enough to annoy, and the drinks barely numbed the stress. I was ready to call it a night when I saw him. Bernard. Young, bold, and magnetic in a way that caught me completely off guard. His messy blonde hair glowed under the club lights, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to see through the haze of the room and straight into me. It was the kind of moment that made the world pause, and I wasn't ready for what came next. Bernard had a presence that was impossible to ignore. He moved through the club with an ease that set him apart from the restless, aimless energy of the crowd. His confidence wasn't loud or attention-seeking, but it drew people in nonetheless. He carried himself like someone who had already won whatever game everyone else was still playing. I noticed him before he noticed me. He stood out in a way that wasn't just about how he looked, though his tousled blonde hair and striking blue eyes made him hard to miss. It was something more, an energy that radiated from him, making it hard to look away. When our eyes finally met, it felt deliberate, like he had been waiting for the right moment to acknowledge my gaze. He didn't glance away shyly or pretend not to notice. He held my stare, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't an invitation, not yet. It was a challenge, daring me to stay as long as I could. Before I knew it, he was beside me. There was no hesitation, no awkward introductions or pretenses. Bernard had a way of taking control of a moment without being overbearing. He had an ease about him that made you want to go along with whatever he wanted, not because he demanded it, but because it felt natural to follow his lead. I don't know what it was about him that made me stay. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, like he had all the time in the world. Or maybe it was the way his eyes seemed to see through me, stripping away all the layers I had spent years building to protect myself. Whatever it was, it worked. He leaned in close, speaking with the kind of confidence that left no room for doubt or hesitation. His presence filled the space between us, pulling me further into his orbit. And then, without a second thought, we left together. The cool night air was sobering, but it didn't dull the buzz Bernard had created in my chest. The club faded into the background as we moved away, the noise replaced by the quiet hum of the city around us. He led the way with a purpose I didn't question. I followed, caught in his momentum, letting him take me somewhere I hadn't been in a long time, a place where I didn't feel the weight of my life pressing down on me. We stopped in a quiet corner, far from the prying eyes of strangers. It wasn't glamorous, but it didn't matter. Bernard didn't need glamour. He had a way of commanding the moment, of making the world shrink down to just him and me. He leaned in, his movements deliberate and sure, his hands finding their place on my hips like they had always belonged there. The first touch of his lips against mine was soft, exploratory, but it didn't take long for it to deepen. There was nothing hesitant about him. He knew exactly what he wanted, and in that moment, so did I. As the night unfolded, the world blurred around us. Time seemed to stop, the demands of my life forgotten. Bernard had this uncanny ability to make everything else disappear. His touch, his presence, his sheer intensity, it was overwhelming in the best way. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about work or deadlines or responsibilities. I was completely in the moment, consumed by the way he made me feel. By the end of the night, we had exchanged numbers. It was a simple gesture, one that could have meant everything or nothing. I told myself not to expect much, to treat it as a fleeting moment of escape. But as I lay in bed later, the memory of him lingered. His touch, his confidence, the way he had taken control, it all played on a loop in my mind. Bernard wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was a reminder of something I had long forgotten, what it felt like to be alive. The next morning, I couldn't shake the thought of him. Bernard lingered in my mind like a vivid dream. His confidence, his touch, the way he had made me feel weightless, free of everything tying me down. My life was usually so predictable, so controlled, but in one night, he had upended all of that. I debated whether to text him. It wasn't like me to reach out, especially after something so impulsive. But this time was different. Something about him felt unfinished, like I needed to see where it could go, even if it was just one more night. When I finally messaged him, it was casual, almost detached. Last night was fun. Want to do it again? I didn't expect a quick reply, but within minutes my phone buzzed. Absolutely. When? That response set something in motion that I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. Not the forced kind that came with promotions or career milestones, but something raw and personal. I suggested meeting that evening. He agreed without hesitation, as if he had been waiting for me to ask. I arrived at the hotel first, my heart racing in a way that both thrilled and unsettled me. The room was modern, clean, and impersonal, a blank slate for whatever was about to happen. I barely had time to settle before a knock echoed through the space. When I opened the door, there he was, just as captivating as the night before. Bernard had a way of carrying himself that made every movement seem intentional, every glance charged with meaning. His blonde hair was slightly Messier, and his eyes locked onto mine the moment I opened the door. He didn't waste time. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. Before I could say a word, his arms were around me, pulling me close. His presence was overwhelming in the best way, his warmth seeping into me as his lips found my neck. Every touch sent a jolt through me, dissolving any lingering doubts. Bernard had this uncanny ability to take control without asking for permission. He guided me to the bed, his hands firm yet gentle, his movements precise. For someone so much younger, he carried an authority that made me forget myself. I let him lead, something I wasn't used to, something I didn't know I could enjoy until now. When he finally undressed me, I felt exposed, not just physically, but in a way that was deeply unfamiliar. He stripped away more than my clothes. The armor I wore every day, the facade of control and composure, was gone. Under his gaze, I was just Philip, vulnerable and alive in a way I hadn't been for years. He took his time, savoring every moment, every reaction. His hands, his mouth, his body, they moved with purpose, as if he was discovering something new with each touch. It wasn't just passion, it was a kind of quiet intensity that left me breathless. When he finally entered me, the world seemed to pause. It wasn't rushed or careless. It was deliberate, every movement measured and meaningful. The heat, the pressure, the sheer fullness of him, it was unlike anything I'd experienced. He moved with a rhythm that felt almost instinctual, each thrust drawing me deeper into the moment, into him. It wasn't just the physical connection that overwhelmed me. It was the way he looked at me, his piercing blue eyes holding mine as if he could see every part of me. In that moment, I wasn't a manager, a man with responsibilities or burdens. I was just someone who wanted, who needed, and who was finally letting himself feel. As the night went on, the roles shifted naturally. I took the lead, showing him the kind of experience I'd gained over the years. His moans, soft but urgent, filled the room, matching the rhythm we created together. It wasn't just about dominance or submission anymore. It was about finding a balance, a give and take that felt right, that felt real. When we finally collapsed beside each other, our bodies tangled and spent, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, the weight of my life didn't feel so heavy. Bernard hadn't just been a distraction. He had reminded me of something I had forgotten, what it meant to feel alive. As I lay there, listening to his steady breathing, I knew this wasn't just another hookup. Bernard had unlocked something in me, something deeper than physical desire. And I wasn't ready to let it go. The morning light filtered through the hotel room's blinds, casting faint patterns across the bed. Bernard was still asleep beside me, his breathing deep and even, his youthful energy now resting, subdued. I watched him for a moment, struck by how at peace he looked, as if the chaos of the night before had melted into something calm and steady. I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake him, and moved to the window. The city stretched out below, bustling with the morning rush, people hurrying off to their routines. It felt like a world apart from where I stood, like a distant reality I didn't quite belong to anymore. Meeting Bernard hadn't just been a thrill, it had been a disruption, an unanticipated shift in the monotony of my life. For so long I had been consumed by work, by the relentless grind that left me feeling empty and disconnected. But with him, even for just one night, I had felt something raw and real. I turned back to the bed, taking in the sight of him. He looked so young, so carefree, so unlike me. And yet, there was something about him that resonated deeply, something that made me question everything I thought I knew about my life. I wasn't naive. I knew this connection, however intense, might not last. Bernard was young and I was not. Our lives were likely heading in different directions, our priorities worlds apart. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had stepped off the hamster wheel, like I had found a moment of clarity in the chaos. When Bernard finally stirred, stretching lazily before opening his eyes, he gave me that same confident smile that had drawn me in from the start. There was no awkwardness, no morning after regrets, just a quiet understanding that what we had shared was something neither of us would forget. As we dressed and parted ways, exchanging a casual goodbye and a promise to text, I couldn't help but feel like something had shifted in me. I wasn't sure where this would go, or even if it would go anywhere at all. But I knew one thing for certain: I didn't want to go back to the life I had before. Bernard had reminded me of something I had buried under years of routine and responsibility, a hunger for connection, for spontaneity, for freedom. Whether he stayed in my life or not, I wasn't ready to let that feeling go. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this.